Farms. What do they mean to you? To some, they might mean food. To others, they might think of cute, cuddly animals. To others, they might think of rednecks with a cumulative IQ of 64 that have mated with their cousins repeatedly for generations. Maybe you think of all of those things, but to me, I think of the true brilliance of bioengineering that allows for the majority of the world to have enough food for sustenance. Although not perfect, it is through scientific advancement that we can allow everyone in the world to have enough food, which I think is a beautiful goal for the world. Anyways, the first step to the mass farms we see today started with crop rotation. So let's take a deep dive into the shallow end of a pool and get started. In order to understand the full importance of crop rotation, we must have a basic knowledge of pre-societal farming, nomadic pastoralism, and the two-field system. We also must have a firm grasp on the fall of Rome and how that led to the emergence of transhumanist pastoralism. If you grow the same crop in the same place year after year, you will get a buildup of pests and diseases specifically to that crop. Different crops take different levels of nutrients from the soil, and inevitably, these nutrient levels become unbalanced. This is often referred to as sick soil. Even the addition of fertilizers is unlikely to help, since it's unlikely to have the trace elements and micronutrients that are depleted in the same way. The easiest way to remember this topic would be to think of the breeding of doge, but all doges, as we know, have a low sperm count, so it takes time for him to get his big mommy GF pregnant. So remember that, it'll come up later. Anyways, before the emergence of mass farming, we saw nomadic pastoralism, which basically revolved around following the migration pattern of herds of animals, and mainly foraging for fruits and vegetables along the way. During this, although fields were never allowed to turn barren, basically because there were no fields, they were never guaranteed a stable food source. So this would be the equivalent to a single doge roaming the clover meadows and silky smooth streams, or wherever doge is native to, searching for his big titty emo GF. Then we see primitive farmers who grow crops in the same field over and over again, ruthlessly stealing the vital nutrients from the same field, making it unable to regain its nitrogen and other nutrients, allowing the field to be suitable for growth. Basically, this doge has found Isabel and is trying to get her pregnant, which she does. But then he has to wait 1 year before mating again. So not the maximum efficiency of doge breeding. This led to a certain middle ground with the emergence of the two-field system, an inefficient system that had one field growing a crop with the other half laying fallow, or empty, like my heart. So in short, one field would be growing wheat while the other one would be empty, filling with weeds to regain its vital nutrients. This system never allowed for a surplus, which would allow specialization, which is where people could focus on specific trades such as bookkeeping or blacksmithing, and allowing for other cultural advancements, technological innovation, and greater philosophical questions other than thinking about peas and I'm hungry. Going back to our Doge example, this is like having Isabel and the goth server at Applebee's, having one pregnant, but the other one does nothing other than eat hot chip and lie. Not efficient, if you ask me. There are many different systems for rotating crops, such as the two-field system, which is a fairly crude method, but others are quite complex. The next simplest is the 3-year crop rotation. And for 2,000 years, since Rome spread their farming practices throughout their empire, European farmers naturally followed Roman cropping system called food, feed, and follow. Farmers divided their land into 3 sections, each year planting a food grain such as wheat in one section, barley or oats as feed for their livestock in another, and a third plot to lie fallow. On this schedule, each section lay fallow and recovered some of its nutrients every 3rd year before being sown again with wheat. Farmers following the food, feed, follow system typically only harvested 6 to 10 times as much seed as they had sown, and saved 1/6 to 1/10 of their harvest to sow for the following year. Low yields left little grain for storage and surplus, and if crops failed, many people would become hungry, either from floods, drought, or pest infestation, which would be kind of like having Isabel, the goth server from Applebee's, and the goth girl who was at GameStop who wouldn't look at me, having one being pregnant, one you're mating with, and one resting and also eating hot chip while being pregnant. The size of agricultural allotments in Europe gradually increased in the beginning of the 15th century, allowing farmers more space to experiment with different crop rotation schedules. By 1800, many European farmers had adopted a 4-year rotation cycle developed in Holland and invented by Jethro Tull, who was basically the Rick from the popular show Rick and Morty of the early modern period. He was also the author of Horse Hoeing Husbandry, subtitled An Essay on the Principles of Tillage and Nutrition, which is a fascinating read. He just happened to invent the seed drill and the horse-drawn hoe while he was at it, and was one of the main architects in the British agricultural revolution. The 4-field system was introduced to Great Britain by Viscount Charles Turnip, who was basically the Chad of English viscounts in the mid-1700s. The 4-field system rotated wheat and barley, and a root-like crop like turnips, and also a nitrogen crop like clover. Livestock grazed directly on the clover and consumed the root crop in the field. In the new system, fields were always planted with either food or feed, increasing both grain yields and livestock productivity. Furthermore, adding a nitrogen-fixing crop, such as clover, and allowing manure to accumulate directly on the fields improved soil fertility and eliminated a fallow period, ensured that the land was protected from soil erosion by stabilizing vegetation through a cycle. Crop rotation fell out of favor in many developed nations by the 1950s, when farmers found that they could maintain high-yield monoculture crops by applying newly developed chemical fertilizers, pesticide, and weed killer to their fields. Large-scale commercial agriculture requires prescribed chemical treatments and has become the norm these days in countries including the United States. However, substantial concerns about the effect of agricultural chemicals on human health and damage to soil structure and fertility by monoculture crops have led many farmers to return to a more natural practice such as crop rotation in the recent decades. So-called conventional farmers use crop rotation in concert with chemical treatments. Organic farmers, who cannot by definition use chemical treatments, rely entirely upon the methods like crop rotation, maintain soil health, and profitable crop yield. But early monoculture crops led to events such as the Great Dust Bowl, which also led to great musicals such as The Wizard of Oz, but also had some bad effects, such as the Great Depression, which I do understand had other causes, but this was also a contributing factor, which is the Doge equivalent of strapping Doge to Isabel, genetically engineering them to have sex repeatedly until they die, and genetically altering Isabel to have pregnancies that last shorter than it takes Doge to nut, thus maximizing the biological limits of the animal. Well, I think that this has been a fascinating conversation, and I really thank you guys for joining me today to talk about one of the most influential agricultural concepts. So, wherever you're listening to this, have a good night, and thank you for stopping around to listen to me ramble about concepts that I find fascinating.